October 22, 1944. Stalag Luft III, Sagen, Germany. A biting wind whipped across the snow-covered compound, stinging Flight Lieutenant Alastair Humphrey's cheeks as he huddled deeper into his threadbare greatcoat. You could almost taste the desperation in the air, thick with the smoke from meager fires and the murmur of hushed conversations. It wasn't the cold that gnawed at him, nor the hunger that perpetually hollowed his stomach. It was the waiting, the endless, agonizing waiting. He watched as a new batch of prisoners, faces pale and drawn, were herded through the main gate by the German guards, their heavy boots crunching on the frozen ground. Each arrival was a stark reminder of the relentless machinery of war, grinding men to dust and scattering them across the globe. Humphrey, a veteran of countless bombing runs over Germany, knew this feeling intimately. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann, a guard at Stalag Luft III for the past 3 years, watched the new arrivals with a jaded eye. He'd seen hundreds, maybe thousands, of these Allied airmen come and go, their faces etched with fear and defiance. But something about this group felt different. An unnerving quiet hung about them, a lack of the usual boisterous complaints and forced camaraderie. As the new prisoners were processed, Hoffman noticed one man in particular. He was tall and gaunt, with eyes that burned with an unsettling intensity. Unlike the others who shuffled along with their heads bowed, this man held himself erect, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the barbed wire. He carried a small, leather-bound book clutched tightly in his hand. Later that evening, as the camp settled into an uneasy truce with the darkness, Hoffman found himself patrolling near Barrack 104, where the new arrivals were housed. He heard a faint scratching sound coming from inside. Curiosity piqued. He cautiously approached the window and peered inside. He saw the tall prisoner, the one with the burning eyes, huddled in a corner. He wasn't sleeping like the others. Instead, he was meticulously drawing symbols on a piece of scrap paper, using a charred piece of wood as a makeshift pencil. The symbols were strange and unfamiliar, a jumble of lines and angles that seemed to writhe on the page. Hoffman couldn't make heads or tails of them. He cleared his throat and the prisoner snapped his head up, his eyes widening in alarm. He quickly crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket. "Was Machen's hirer sold at?" Hoffman barked, demanding an explanation. The prisoner stared back at him, his face a mask of defiance. "Nothing," he said in heavily accented German. "Just trying to stay warm." Hoffman didn't believe him for a second. He ordered the prisoner to empty his pockets. The man hesitated, then slowly complied, producing a few scraps of food, a worn photograph of a woman, and the small, leather-bound book. Hoffman snatched the book and flipped through its pages. It was filled with handwritten notes in a language he didn't recognize, interspersed with more of the strange symbols he had seen the prisoner drawing. He felt a prickle of unease. This was more than just idle doodling. He confiscated the book and the crumpled piece of paper, promising to return them in the morning. The prisoner watched him go, his eyes filled with a simmering rage. Back in his office, Hoffman tried to decipher the book. He showed it to several other guards, but none of them could make sense of it. They dismissed it as the ramblings of a madman. But Hoffman couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled upon something important, something dangerous. He decided to consult with Hauptmann Klaus Richter, the camp's intelligence officer, a man known for his sharp mind and meticulous attention to detail. Richter examined the book with a professional detachment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Interesting," he said finally. "This appears to be some kind of code. I've never seen anything like it." He ordered Hoffman to keep a close watch on the prisoner and to report any unusual activity. He also instructed him to discreetly search the prisoner's belongings and to try to find out more about his background. Humphrey, meanwhile, found himself increasingly drawn to the new prisoner. There was an aura of mystery about him, a quiet intensity that set him apart from the other men. He learned that the prisoner's name was Captain Jean-Luc Dubois, a French intelligence officer who had been captured during a raid on a German U-boat base. Dubois was a man of few words, but Humphrey sensed that he was hiding something. He noticed that Dubois spent hours poring over maps of the camp and the surrounding area, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He also seemed to have an uncanny ability to anticipate the movements of the guards, One evening, as they were sharing a meager portion of potato soup, Humphrey decided to broach the subject of the strange symbols. "I saw you drawing those symbols," he said casually. "What are they?" Dubois stiffened, his eyes darting around nervously. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "Just a hobby." Humphrey didn't believe him. "Come on, Dubois," he pressed. "You can trust me. What are you up to?" Dubois hesitated, then sighed. "I can't tell you," he said. "It's too dangerous. If the Germans found out—" He trailed off, his eyes filled with a dark foreboding. Humphrey, intrigued, pressed further, but Dubois refused to say anything more. He simply shook his head and turned away, leaving Humphrey to wonder what secrets he was hiding. Days turned into weeks, and the mystery surrounding Dubois deepened. Hoffman continued to monitor him closely, but he couldn't uncover anything concrete. The book remained locked away in Richter's office, its secrets stubbornly impenetrable. Then, one cold December morning, everything changed. As the prisoners were lining up for roll call, Dubois suddenly collapsed, clutching his chest. He gasped for air, his face turning a ghastly shade of blue. The guards rushed him to the camp infirmary, where the doctor, a weary old man named Schmidt, examined him. After a few minutes, Schmidt emerged from the infirmary, his face grim. "He's dead," he announced. "Heart failure." Humphrey felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't believe that Dubois was gone. He was convinced that there was more to his death than met the eye. Hoffman, too, was suspicious. He had seen Dubois only the day before, and he had seemed perfectly healthy. He wondered if the prisoner had been poisoned or if he had somehow managed to take his own life. Richter ordered an immediate investigation into Dubois' death. He instructed Hoffman to search his belongings once again, hoping to find some clue as to what he had been up to. As Hoffman sifted through Dubois' meager possessions, he found something he had missed before: a small, intricately carved wooden box hidden beneath his mattress. The box was locked, but Hoffman managed to pry it open. Inside, he found a collection of strange objects: a compass, a small knife, a roll of silk thread, and a piece of paper folded into a tiny square. He carefully unfolded the paper and saw that it was covered in the same strange symbols he had seen Dubois drawing. This time, however, the symbols were accompanied by a series of numbers and letters. Hoffman realized that he had stumbled upon a key to the code in the book. He immediately took the box and its contents to Richter, who was ecstatic. "This is it," he exclaimed. "This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for." Richter summoned a team of cryptographers to his office and ordered them to decipher the code. They worked tirelessly for hours, poring over the symbols and numbers, comparing them to known ciphers and codes. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they cracked the code. The message was written in a complex combination of French and German, using a series of substitutions and transpositions. It was a masterpiece of espionage. As Richter read the translated message, his face grew pale. He realized that Dubois had been a key player in a vast network of spies and saboteurs operating behind enemy lines. The message contained details of planned attacks on German military installations, troop movements, and supply lines. It also revealed a shocking secret. Dubois had been in contact with a high-ranking German officer who was secretly working for the Allies. This officer, codenamed the Nightingale, had been providing Dubois with vital intelligence for months. Richter was stunned. He had no idea that there was a traitor in their midst. He immediately launched a massive investigation to uncover the identity of the Nightingale. Meanwhile, Humphrey was consumed with grief and suspicion. He couldn't shake the feeling that Dubois had been murdered. He decided to conduct his own investigation, questioning the other prisoners and searching for any clues that the Germans might have missed. He learned that Dubois had been receiving regular visits from a young nurse who worked in the camp infirmary. Her name was Elsa, and she was known for her kindness and compassion. Humphrey tracked down Elsa and questioned her about her relationship with Dubois. At first, she was reluctant to talk, but after he explained his suspicions, she agreed to help him. Elsa revealed that she had been secretly helping Dubois to communicate with the outside world. She had been smuggling messages in and out of the camp, using a network of contacts in the nearby town. She also told Humphrey that Dubois had been working on a plan to escape from the camp. He had been gathering information about the camp's defenses and had been trying to recruit other prisoners to join him. Humphrey realized that Dubois had been far more than just a prisoner of war. He had been a brave and resourceful spy, risking his life to fight against the Nazis. He was determined to uncover the truth about his death and to expose the traitor who had betrayed him. He knew that it was a dangerous game, but he was willing to risk everything to avenge Dubois' death and to bring the Nightingale to justice. As the investigation into Dubois' death deepened, the atmosphere at Stalag Luft III grew increasingly tense. The guards were on high alert, and the prisoners were subjected to constant searches and interrogations. Humphrey and Elsa continued to work together, gathering information and piecing together the puzzle of Dubois' death. They discovered that Dubois had been poisoned with a rare and undetectable toxin. They also learned that the Nightingale had been the one who had betrayed Dubois to the Germans. He had feared that Dubois was getting too close to uncovering his identity and had decided to eliminate him. Humphrey and Elsa knew that they had to expose the Nightingale before he could do any more damage. But they were running out of time. The Germans were closing in on them, and they knew that it was only a matter of time before they were caught. In a desperate attempt to expose the Nightingale, Humphrey and Elsa decided to send a message to the Allies, revealing his identity and his treachery. They knew that it was a long shot, but it was their only hope. Elsa managed to smuggle a message out of the camp, hidden inside a loaf of bread. The message was delivered to a contact in the nearby town, who passed it on to a British intelligence officer. The British officer immediately recognized the importance of the message and forwarded it to London. The information was then passed on to the American authorities, who launched a full-scale investigation into the Nightingale. Meanwhile, at Stalag Luft III, the tension reached a fever pitch. The guards were conducting a thorough search of the camp, looking for any evidence of espionage or sabotage. Humphrey and Elsa knew that their time was running out. They decided to make a final stand, confronting the Nightingale and exposing him to the other prisoners. They gathered the prisoners in the main compound and accused the Nightingale of betraying Dubois and of working for the Germans. The prisoners were shocked and outraged. The Nightingale, who was a respected officer and a trusted member of the camp community, denied the accusations. He claimed that he was being framed and that he was a victim of a conspiracy. But Humphrey and Elsa had evidence to back up their claims. They presented the prisoners with the message that they had sent to the Allies, which revealed the Nightingale's identity and his treachery. The prisoners were convinced. They turned on the Nightingale, denouncing him as a traitor and demanding that he be handed over to the authorities. The guards intervened, arresting the Nightingale and taking him away for questioning. He was later tried and convicted of treason and sentenced to death. With the Nightingale exposed and brought to justice, the atmosphere at Stalag Luft III began to ease. The prisoners felt a sense of relief and vindication. Humphrey and Elsa were hailed as heroes. They had risked their lives to uncover the truth about Dubois' death and to expose the traitor who had betrayed him. But their work was not yet done. They knew that there were still other spies and saboteurs operating behind enemy lines. They vowed to continue their fight against the Nazis until the war was won and the world was safe once again. However, even with the traitor revealed, a nagging question lingered in Humphrey's mind. The message they sent, the one that exposed the Nightingale, contained more than just his identity. It included a list of names, a roster of individuals involved in a secret operation, an operation far grander and more audacious than simple espionage. The names were a mix of Allied prisoners and, disturbingly, several German officers. What was this operation, and what role did these individuals play? The final name on the list sent a chill down Humphrey's spine. It was the name of Dr. Schmidt, the weary old camp doctor who had pronounced Dubois dead. Could the kind, seemingly harmless doctor be involved in something sinister? He remembered the day of Dubois' death, the doctor's grim pronouncement, the unsettlingly quick disposal of the body. Had Dubois been poisoned as they suspected? And if so, was Schmidt the one who administered the fatal dose? Humphrey decided he had to investigate. He started by subtly questioning the other prisoners about their interactions with Schmidt. He learned that the doctor often spent late nights in the infirmary, poring over medical records and conducting strange experiments. One prisoner recounted an incident where he saw Schmidt injecting Dubois with an unknown substance just days before his death. When questioned, Schmidt had brushed it off as a routine vaccination, but the prisoner had never forgotten the look in the doctor's eyes, a strange mix of fear and determination. Humphrey's suspicions grew stronger. He needed proof. He decided to break into the infirmary and search for evidence. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped away from his barrack and made his way to the infirmary. He picked the lock on the door and slipped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The infirmary was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else, something indefinably unpleasant. Humphrey began his search, carefully sifting through the doctor's medical records and examining the various vials and syringes on the shelves. He found nothing incriminating at first. Then, in a locked cabinet, he discovered a hidden compartment. Inside, he found a small, leather-bound journal, similar to the one that Dubois had carried. He opened the journal and began to read. The journal was written in German, but Humphrey could understand enough to get the gist of it. It was a record of Schmidt's experiments, experiments that were far from routine. The journal described how Schmidt had been secretly working with the Germans to develop a new type of biological weapon, a weapon that could target specific ethnic groups. Dubois, it turned out, had stumbled upon this operation and had been trying to expose it. Schmidt had been forced to silence him, using the undetectable toxin that Humphrey and Elsa had suspected. But the journal revealed something even more disturbing. Schmidt wasn't just working to create a biological weapon. He was testing it on the prisoners. The journal contained detailed notes on the prisoners who had been subjected to the experiments, their symptoms, and their reactions to the various treatments. It was a horrifying catalog of human suffering. Humphrey's blood ran cold. He realized that the prisoners weren't just victims of war. They were guinea pigs in a deadly experiment. He flipped through the pages, searching for his own name, for any indication that he had been targeted. He found nothing. But then he saw a name that made his heart stop: Elsa. The journal revealed that Elsa had been unknowingly assisting Schmidt in his experiments, providing him with valuable information about the prisoner's health and behavior. She had been a pawn in his twisted game. Humphrey knew that he had to warn her, but it was too late. As he turned to leave the infirmary, he heard a sound behind him. He spun around and saw Schmidt standing in the doorway, a syringe in his hand. Schmidt's face was a mask of cold determination. "I'm sorry, Humphrey," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But you know too much. I can't let you leave here alive." Humphrey braced himself for the attack, but then something unexpected happened. Elsa appeared behind Schmidt, a scalpel in her hand. She lunged at the doctor, stabbing him in the back. Schmidt cried out in pain and stumbled forward, dropping the syringe. Humphrey grabbed the syringe and held it up, ready to defend himself. Elsa turned to him, her face pale and drawn. "I know what he's been doing," she said, her voice trembling. "I saw the journal. I had to stop him." Humphrey stared at her in disbelief. He couldn't believe that she had been willing to risk her life to save him. Together, they confronted Schmidt and managed to overpower him. They tied him up and alerted the other prisoners, who were outraged by his treachery. The prisoners decided to hold Schmidt accountable for his crimes. They convened a makeshift tribunal and put him on trial. Schmidt was found guilty of murder, conspiracy, and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to death. With Schmidt brought to justice, the prisoners felt a sense of closure. They had survived the horrors of war and had exposed a deadly conspiracy, but the war was far from over. They knew that they still had a long way to go before they could return home. And as Humphrey looked at the list of names once more, the names of those involved in the secret operation, he couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more secrets to be uncovered, more dangers to be faced. One name in particular caught his eye, a name he hadn't noticed before. It was the name of Hauptmann Klaus Richter, the camp's intelligence officer. Could Richter have been involved in Schmidt's experiments? Was he the mastermind behind the biological weapon program? Humphrey knew that he had to find out. But investigating Richter would be far more dangerous than anything he had done before. Richter was a powerful and ruthless man, and he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened him. But Humphrey was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. He owed it to Dubois, to Elsa, and to all the prisoners who had been victimized by Schmidt's experiments. He began his investigation by discreetly questioning the other guards about Richter's behavior. He learned that Richter had been a frequent visitor to the infirmary, often spending hours talking to Schmidt in private. He also discovered that Richter had been responsible for suppressing any reports of unusual illnesses or deaths among the prisoners. He had been actively covering up Schmidt's crimes. Humphrey's suspicions were confirmed. Richter was involved, but what was his role? Was he simply an accomplice, or was he the one who had conceived of the biological weapon program in the first place? To find out, Humphrey knew that he would have to get his hands on Richter's personal files. He decided to break into Richter's office and search for evidence. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped away from his barrack and made his way to Richter's office. He picked the lock on the door and slipped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The office was dimly lit by a single candle, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The air was thick with the smell of cigar smoke and old paper. Humphrey began his search, carefully sifting through the files and documents on Richter's desk. He found nothing incriminating at first. Then, in a locked drawer, he discovered a hidden compartment. Inside, he found a small, leather-bound diary. He opened the diary and began to read. The diary was written in German, but Humphrey could understand enough to get the gist of it. It was a record of Richter's thoughts and plans, his ambitions and his dreams. As he read, Humphrey's blood ran cold. He realized that Richter was far more dangerous than he had imagined. Richter was a true believer in the Nazi ideology, a man who was willing to do anything to achieve his goals. The diary revealed that Richter had conceived of the biological weapon program as a way to achieve ultimate victory in the war. He believed that by targeting specific ethnic groups, he could weaken the enemy and ensure the triumph of the Third Reich. Schmidt had been his willing accomplice, carrying out his experiments and suppressing any dissent. But Richter had been the mastermind, the one who had pulled the strings. Humphrey also learned that Richter had been in contact with high-ranking officials in Berlin who were aware of the biological weapon program and had been providing him with funding and support. The diary contained a list of names, the names of the officials who had been involved in the program. Humphrey recognized several of them as prominent figures in the Nazi regime. He realized that he had stumbled upon a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the German government. Exposing this conspiracy would be a monumental task, but he knew that he had to do it. He copied the list of names and the relevant passages from the diary, then carefully replaced everything as he had found it. He slipped out of Richter's office, his mind racing. He knew that he had to get this information to the Allies as soon as possible. But how? He was a prisoner of war, trapped behind enemy lines. He decided to confide in Elsa. He trusted her implicitly, and he knew that she would do everything in her power to help him. He showed her the list of names and the copies from Richter's diary. Elsa was horrified. She couldn't believe that Richter and the Nazi regime were capable of such evil. Together, they devised a plan to smuggle the information out of the camp. They decided to hide it inside a Red Cross package, hoping that it would make its way to the Allies. Elsa used her contacts in the nearby town to arrange for the package to be delivered to a British intelligence officer. The officer received the package and immediately recognized the importance of its contents. He forwarded the information to London, where it was analyzed by experts. The experts confirmed that the information was authentic and that it revealed a vast conspiracy within the Nazi regime. The Allies launched a full-scale investigation into the biological weapon program. They uncovered evidence of atrocities and crimes against humanity. The officials who had been involved in the program were arrested and brought to justice. They were tried at Nuremberg and sentenced to death. With the biological weapon program exposed and dismantled, the prisoners at Stalag Luft III felt a sense of relief and vindication. They had played a crucial role in uncovering a deadly conspiracy, and bringing the perpetrators to justice. But their work was not yet done. The war was still raging, and they knew that they still had a long way to go before they could return home. And as Humphrey looked at the list of names one last time, he noticed something that he had missed before. One of the names on the list was not a German official. It was an American. The name was Dr. Samuel Albright, a renowned scientist who had been working on a top-secret research project for the U.S. government. What was an American scientist doing on a list of Nazi conspirators? And what role did he play in the biological weapon program? The question hung in the air like a malevolent fog, thicker and more suffocating than any he had faced before. It's like the whole thing was just a much bigger thing, something far bigger than just that one camp and the people inside it. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more intriguing tales from World War II, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Do you know any other stories? Share them in the comments below. What was an American scientist doing on a list of Nazi conspirators? And what role did he play in the biological weapon program? The question hung in the air like a malevolent fog, thicker and more suffocating than any he had faced before. It seemed the whole thing was just a much bigger thing, something far bigger than just that one camp and the people inside it. Humphrey knew he couldn't dismiss this. Albright's presence on that list meant the conspiracy snaked its way across the Atlantic, implicating individuals within the Allied forces themselves. The implications were staggering. Was the U.S. government aware of Albright's involvement? Were they complicit in the Nazis' horrific experiments? Or was Albright a rogue agent, acting on his own twisted agenda? The uncertainty was a suffocating blanket. He decided to start with what he knew, Albright's area of expertise. Elsa, resourceful as ever, managed to procure a tattered copy of a scientific journal from one of her contacts, a local librarian who sympathized with the Allied cause. The journal contained a paper authored by Albright, detailing his research into the effects of certain chemical compounds on the human nervous system. The language was dense and technical, but Humphrey recognized key phrases and concepts that linked Albright's research to the symptoms exhibited by the prisoners who had been subjected to Schmidt's experiments. He shared his findings with Elsa, who paled as she grasped the implications. He knew, she whispered, her voice trembling. Albright knew what Schmidt was doing and he was helping him. They were faced with a horrifying realization. The biological weapon program wasn't just a Nazi initiative. It was a collaborative effort, fueled by the twisted ambitions of scientists on both sides of the conflict. The revelation sent a fresh wave of paranoia through the camp. Who else was involved? Could they trust anyone? The atmosphere of suspicion and distrust thickened, threatening to tear the fragile bonds of camaraderie that had sustained them through their captivity. Humphrey knew he had to act quickly, before the conspiracy consumed them all. He decided to seek out a prisoner named Davies, a former intelligence officer in the British Army. Davies was a shrewd and observant man, with a keen eye for detail and a network of contacts throughout the camp. Humphrey had always been wary of Davies, sensing a certain detachment and a hidden agenda beneath his polite demeanor. But he was desperate, and Davies was his only hope. He approached Davies in the mess hall, a crowded and chaotic space where prisoners gathered to eat their meager rations. "Davies, I need your help," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've uncovered something terrible." Davies listened intently as Humphrey recounted his findings, his expression unreadable. When Humphrey finished, Davies remained silent for a long moment, his eyes narrowed in thought. "This is dangerous information, Humphrey," he said finally. "If what you say is true, then we're dealing with something far bigger than we can imagine." "I know," Humphrey replied. "That's why I need your help. I need to get this information to the Allies." Davies nodded slowly. "I have a contact," he said. "A man who can get messages out of the camp, but it's a risky operation if we're caught." "I'm willing to take the risk," Humphrey interrupted. "We have to. Too many lives are at stake." Davies agreed to help, but he warned Humphrey that they had to be careful. They couldn't trust anyone, not even their closest friends. As they were talking, Humphrey noticed a figure standing near the entrance to the mess hall, watching them intently. It was Sergeant Hoffman, the guard who had confiscated Dubois' book. Hoffman's eyes met Humphrey's, and a chill ran down Humphrey's spine. He had a feeling that Hoffman had overheard their conversation. Later that evening, as Humphrey was lying in his bunk trying to make sense of everything he had learned, he heard a faint scratching sound coming from outside the barrack. He cautiously got up and peered out the window. He saw a figure lurking in the shadows near the barbed wire fence. It was a woman. She was wearing a Red Cross uniform. It was Elsa. But what was she doing out there in the middle of the night? Humphrey slipped out of the barrack and approached Elsa cautiously. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. "It's not safe." Elsa turned to him, her face pale and agitated. "I had to see you," she said. "Something's happened. I've been reassigned." "Reassigned? Where?" Humphrey asked, his heart sinking. "To the infirmary," Elsa replied. "Schmidt's old post." The words hung in the air, heavy with dread. Why would they reassign Elsa to the infirmary, the epicenter of Schmidt's horrific experiments? Was it a coincidence? Or was it a deliberate attempt to silence her, to keep her from exposing the truth? "Humphrey, I'm scared," Elsa whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know who to trust anymore." "You can trust me," Humphrey said, his voice firm. "We'll get through this together." He pulled her close, offering what little comfort he could. As they stood there, huddled together in the darkness, they heard a sudden noise, a gunshot. They both froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The gunshot was followed by a chorus of shouts and screams. Something terrible was happening in the camp. They had to find out what. They cautiously made their way towards the source of the commotion, their senses on high alert. As they rounded a corner, they saw a group of prisoners gathered around a figure lying on the ground. It was Davies. He had been shot. He was dead. Humphrey felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Davies was the only one who could get their message out of the camp. Now he was gone, and they were trapped. He knelt down beside Davies' body, searching for any clue, any indication of who had killed him. He noticed a small piece of paper clutched tightly in Davies' hand. He carefully pried it open and saw that it was a list of names. It was the same list that Humphrey had copied from Richter's diary, the list of Nazi officials involved in the biological weapon program. But there was one name that had been added to the bottom of the list. It was Humphrey's name. He felt a surge of panic. Someone knew that he was investigating the conspiracy, and they were trying to silence him. He looked up and saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching him intently. It was Richter. Richter's eyes met Humphrey's, and a cold smile spread across his face. Humphrey knew that he was in grave danger. Richter knew what he was up to, and he wasn't going to let him expose the truth. He grabbed Elsa's hand and pulled her away from the crowd. "We have to get out of here," he said. "They're coming for us." They ran through the camp, their hearts pounding in their chests, trying to escape from Richter and his men. As they ran, Humphrey realized that they were running out of time. They were trapped in a prison camp, surrounded by enemies. Their only hope was to find a way to get the information about the conspiracy to the Allies before it was too late. They sought refuge in an abandoned storage shed. It was dark and damp, but it offered a temporary reprieve from the chaos outside. "What do we do now?" Elsa asked, her voice filled with despair. "We have to find a way to get this information out of the camp," Humphrey replied. "There has to be a way." He racked his brain, trying to think of a plan. He remembered something that Davies had told him about a secret tunnel that the prisoners had been digging, a tunnel that led outside the camp. "The tunnel," he said. "We can use the tunnel to escape and get the information to the Allies." Elsa's eyes lit up. "But how do we find the tunnel?" she asked. "Davies knew the location," Humphrey replied. "He must have left a clue somewhere." They searched the storage shed, looking for any sign of the tunnel, any indication of where it might be located. After what seemed like an eternity, they found something. Scrawled on the inside of a wooden crate, they saw a series of numbers and symbols. It was a code. Humphrey recognized the code. It was the same code that Dubois had been using in his book. He realized that Davies and Dubois had been working together, trying to expose the conspiracy. He deciphered the code and discovered a set of coordinates. The coordinates pointed to a specific location within the camp. It was the location of the tunnel. They cautiously made their way towards the coordinates, their senses on high alert. As they approached the location, they saw a group of prisoners gathered around a seemingly innocuous pile of lumber. The prisoners were acting suspiciously, glancing around nervously as if they were trying to hide something. Humphrey realized that they had found the entrance to the tunnel. They approached the prisoners and identified themselves. The prisoners were wary at first, but after Humphrey explained that he and Elsa were working to expose the conspiracy, they agreed to help. They led them to a hidden opening in the ground, concealed beneath the pile of lumber. It was the entrance to the tunnel. Humphrey and Elsa climbed down into the tunnel, their hearts pounding in their chests. The tunnel was dark and narrow, and the air was thick with the smell of dirt and mildew. As they crawled through the tunnel, they heard the sounds of digging and hammering. The prisoners were still working on the tunnel, trying to complete their escape. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached the end of the tunnel. They emerged into a dense forest just outside the perimeter of the camp. They had escaped. They were free. But they knew that their work was far from over. They still had to get the information about the conspiracy to the Allies, and they knew that Richter and his men would be hot on their trail. They made their way through the forest, trying to evade capture. As they traveled, Humphrey realized that they were being followed. He could hear the sounds of footsteps and voices in the distance. Richter and his men were closing in. They had to find a way to escape, to get the information to the Allies before it was too late. They came to a small village. Desperate, they sought refuge in the church, hoping the sanctity of the place would offer some protection. The village priest, a kind-faced man named Father Michael, listened intently to their story. Appalled by what he heard, he agreed to help them. He hid them in the church's bell tower and promised to contact the local resistance. While they waited, Humphrey couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Father Michael, though seemingly benevolent, displayed a subtle nervousness, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Humphrey remembered Davy's warning, "Trust no one." He decided to discreetly observe the priest. He noticed Father Michael often slipped away for brief periods, always returning with the same anxious expression. One evening, Humphrey followed him. He watched as the priest entered a seemingly abandoned building on the edge of the village. Humphrey cautiously approached and peered through a crack in the wall. Inside, Father Michael was meeting with a group of German soldiers. He was handing them a piece of paper. Humphrey's blood ran cold. He had been betrayed. The priest was working with the Germans. But why, and what was on that piece of paper? He crept back to the church, his mind reeling. He had to warn Elsa. He found her praying in the bell tower. "Elsa, we have to leave," he said, his voice urgent. "The priest, he's working with the Germans." Elsa was stunned. "But he seemed so kind," she stammered. "I know," Humphrey replied, "but we can't trust him. He's betrayed us." They quietly gathered their meager belongings and prepared to flee. As they were about to leave, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching the bell tower. It was Father Michael, accompanied by a group of German soldiers. They were trapped. "I'm sorry, my children," Father Michael said, his voice filled with false remorse. "But I have no choice. You know too much." The soldiers raised their weapons, preparing to fire. Humphrey and Elsa braced themselves for the inevitable. But then something unexpected happened. A group of villagers stormed into the church, armed with pitchforks and shovels. They attacked the German soldiers, shouting and screaming. A fierce battle erupted inside the church. Humphrey and Elsa joined the fight, using whatever they could find as weapons. The villagers, though outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a fierce determination, fueled by their hatred of the Germans. In the chaos, Humphrey managed to grab the piece of paper that Father Michael had handed to the soldiers. He glanced at it quickly and realized that it was a map of the surrounding area, with a specific location marked with a red X. He didn't have time to decipher the map. He knew that they had to escape, to get the information to the Allies. But as they fought their way out of the church, Humphrey saw something that made his blood run cold. Richter was standing outside, watching the battle with a cold smile on his face. He hadn't been fooled. He had known all along that they were in the village, and he had set a trap. Humphrey knew that they were running out of time. He had to make a decision. He could try to escape to get the information to the Allies, or he could confront Richter to try to stop him from carrying out his plans. He looked at Elsa, her face covered in dirt and blood, her eyes filled with fear and determination. He knew that he couldn't leave her. He had to protect her. He made his decision. He grabbed Elsa's hand and pulled her towards Richter. "We're not running anymore," he said. "We're going to finish this." Richter's smile widened. "So you finally decided to face me," he said. "I've been expecting you." He raised his hand, signaling to his men. The soldiers opened fire. Humphrey and Elsa ducked for cover, dodging the bullets. They had to find a way to get close to Richter to stop him before he could kill them. As they were dodging the bullets, Humphrey noticed something. One of the soldiers was wearing a Red Cross armband. It was Hoffman, the guard who had confiscated Dubois' book. Hoffman was working with Richter. But why? What was his role in the conspiracy? Humphrey realized that he had underestimated the extent of the Nazis' reach. They had infiltrated every aspect of the camp, even the Red Cross. He saw an opening and charged towards Richter, drawing his makeshift knife. Richter's men tried to intercept him, but Humphrey was too quick. He dodged their attacks and lunged at Richter, slashing at him with the knife. Richter parried the attack and struck Humphrey in the face, knocking him to the ground. As Humphrey lay on the ground, dazed and bleeding, Richter raised his pistol, preparing to fire the killing shot. Suddenly, Elsa lunged at Richter, tackling him to the ground. The pistol flew out of his hand. They wrestled on the ground, struggling for control of the weapon. Humphrey staggered to his feet and rushed to help Elsa. He kicked the pistol away from Richter and helped Elsa to her feet. They stood there, panting and exhausted, staring down at Richter, who was lying on the ground, defeated. "It's over, Richter," Humphrey said. "You've lost." Richter looked up at them, his eyes filled with hatred. "You may have won this battle," he said, "but the war is far from over. The Reich will rise again. And you will all pay." Humphrey ignored him. He knew that Richter was a fanatic, a true believer in the Nazi ideology. He would never give up. He turned to Elsa. "We have to get out of here," he said. "It's not safe." They fled the village, leaving Richter and his men behind. They knew that they were still in danger. Richter would do everything in his power to hunt them down and silence them. But they were determined to get the information about the conspiracy to the Allies, no matter the cost. They made their way through the forest, following the map that Humphrey had taken from Father Michael. The map led them to a remote airfield, hidden deep in the woods. As they approached the airfield, they saw a small plane preparing for takeoff. It was a German plane. They realized that Richter was planning to escape, to flee to safety before they could expose him. They rushed towards the plane, determined to stop him. As they approached, they saw a figure standing near the plane, waiting for Richter. It was Dr. Samuel Albright, the American scientist. Albright was working with Richter. He was the mastermind behind the biological weapon program. The revelation sent a shockwave through Humphrey. He couldn't believe that an American could be capable of such evil. He ran towards Albright, shouting his name. Albright turned to him, his face filled with surprise. "Humphrey," he said, "what are you doing here?" "I know what you've been up to, Albright," Humphrey replied. "I know about the biological weapon program. I know about the experiments. I know about everything." Albright's expression hardened. "You know too much," he said. "I can't let you leave here alive." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a syringe. It was filled with a clear liquid. Humphrey recognized the liquid. It was the same toxin that Schmidt had used to kill Dubois. Albright was planning to kill him. But before Albright could inject him, a shot rang out. Albright gasped and stumbled backward, dropping the syringe. He looked down at his chest and saw a small hole, bleeding profusely. He turned to see who had shot him. Standing behind him with a smoking pistol in her hand was Elsa. She had saved his life. Again, Albright collapsed to the ground, dead. Humphrey turned to Richter, who was standing near the plane, watching the scene unfold with a look of shock and disbelief. "It's over, Richter," Humphrey said. "You've lost. Your plane is not going anywhere. We will reveal everything." Richter slowly regained his composure. He locked eyes with Humphrey, a sinister smile creeping across his face. "Perhaps," he said, his voice laced with venom, "but even if I fall, the truth will die with us all. You think you know everything, Humphrey. You haven't even scratched the surface." He paused, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. "Tell me, Flight Lieutenant, have you ever wondered why Stalag Luft III was built on this particular patch of land?" Before Humphrey could react, Richter turned and boarded the plane, the engines roaring to life. As the aircraft hurtled down the runway, Humphrey noticed something carved into the earth, partially obscured by the freshly fallen snow. He squinted, trying to make out the shape, a geometric pattern of immense scale. And as the plane lifted off, soaring into the night sky, Humphrey realized with chilling certainty what lay beneath the camp. A design etched into the very fabric of the earth. A massive, ancient symbol radiating outwards. A symbol that whispered of something far older, far more sinister than even the Nazis themselves.